Okay, welcome back to History Burst, Aftermath of the Civil War. So it's a short burst that covers some of the changes to the Constitution, so some of the political changes that will be echoed in another burst further on. But it's a short summary of what to expect that particularly affect African Americans who are now free. All right, so as it says, after the North's victory, the issue is reunifying the nation. Think of Humpty Dumpty. Yeah, Humpty Dumpty was America, the Union prior to 1861. And then Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and that's the spark of the war at Fort Sumter. And 4 years of war, what America has to do is got to put Humpty back together again. Got to put America, put the Union back together again, reunify, bring together the North and the seceded Southern states back into the fold, and kind of try to form a basis to move forward. So the responsibility fell on the American government, the federal government. They've got to show that the federal government was stronger than ever, and that because it had been that power tussle between federal and state government about the issue of whether or not who chose whether a state joining the union was slave or free, the federal government has to assert its authority and make it very, very clear that they have kind of the final say when it comes to these national issues, and that the states have to adhere to the line that the Civil War drew, which was that slavery is going to be abolished, and African Americans are going to be protected by laws. And that's what this burst will look at in a bit of detail. And as always, you can pause the video to read a little bit deeper and then obviously restart it to move on. So what we see is a timeline that shows some developments about amendments. The Constitution, which is the American rule book, the fundamental rules that no matter which state you live in, you have at your beck and call as your protection. So amendments, whether they're 13th, the 2nd, the 1st, a bit like the commandments in the Bible, they are absolute in law. And so we see some amendments to accommodate the protection of these newly freed African Americans after the Civil War. So 1865, within a year, the same year the war ended, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolishes slavery unless it was for punishment as a crime. Yeah, for a crime. 1866, the Civil Rights Act declares all people who were born in the USA as citizens and had full legal rights. So that includes children of former slaves. Anybody born in the USA is a full citizen and has full equal legal rights. It made it illegal to deny someone these rights under federal law. So the federal law is saying African Americans are free, whether they are in Georgia, New York, Missouri, Mississippi, Texas, and the local state law in any of those states cannot contradict that fundamental protection the federal law under the Civil Rights Act guaranteed. Really important that you remind yourself about that disparity between federal and state law. It is federal law after the Union has come back together after the war that is asserting its authority over the states about this sensitive issue about, well, what's going to happen to the African Americans who were slaves. 1868, you've got the 14th Amendment that gives equal rights and citizenship to African Americans and slaves who had been set free after the Civil War. So it's that idea that you are equal under the law, regardless of the colour of your skin and the history and the circumstances of your birth. Again, really, really important. 1870, the Civil Rights Act was also known as the Enforcement Act and designed to reinforce that 15th Amendment by bringing in federal criminal penalties for anyone trying to prevent African Americans from voting or threatening them to dissuade them from voting. So above the timeline, the 15th Amendment protecting the rights of people being able to vote. And if you interfere with someone's ability to vote, whether they are former slave or not, it is a crime punishable under federal law, no matter what state you live in. All right, so those are some of the key legislation after the war that are particular to these now free African American people. So as it says in red, they are really, really important, and they're known as Reconstruction Amendments. Remember the Humpty Dumpty analogy? Reconstruction, rebuilding, putting the blocks back together again, putting Humpty back together again. These are some of the laws that are trying to build back America as a union, regardless of whether they're in North and South. Yeah. And reinforcing that superiority, that strength of the federal law superseding the local state laws. All right, so really important that you know some of those amendments. And finally, we've got a couple, of things that you can be aware of, that you can obviously research further, look in your notebooks, look in your revision guides online, that it's not all plain sailing for the African Americans who are now free. The law says one thing, but in their day-to-day lives, there are opportunities where it is undermined, these new freedoms and rights for voting and being seen as equal. The KKK, Ku Klux Klan, you can see in the picture, aims a rifle at an African American home. Despite federal laws such as the ones previously mentioned, violence against African Americans continues. It's still common. So it's especially common in the South, where that entrenched racial divide through generations of being slave owners or slaves themselves, it's signing a document under the law is not going to wipe away and dilute that inherent racial distinction and divide that has formed part of Southern life for decades. So this verse just kind of ties up some of the legislation that comes afterwards, but it's not a magic wand, and that's what you need to take away, as well as some of the details to some of those particular laws.